I'm going to be reading Luke chapter 8, verses 1 through 3. After this, Jesus traveled about from one town and village to another, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of God. The 12 were with him, and also some women who had been cured of evil spirits and diseases. Mary, called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had come out. Joanna, the wife of Cuza, the manager of Herod's household. Susanna, and many others. These women were helping to support them out of their own means.
Just leave that slide right there for a second, Reggie. This is totally unplanned, all right? There are some challenges sometimes to working with churches that have different age groups. And so I got this little thing going with this group up here, and they're asking me to use a word in a sermon, which is a little thing that we've got going on. And they're all pointing to Zach. And the word is lit, all right? Now, here's my multi-generational problem. What does that word mean? Means awesome. So if you say, right now, if you say something is lit, that means that something is awesome. It is just undescribable. It is so great. Charlie Moffat, if I were to say Charlie Moffat is lit, what does that mean? Just hang on a minute. And in your growing up, what does that mean, Charlie? He's drunk. So here's my struggle. My struggle is these wonderful kids want me to use the word lit. If I use the word lit, they're going to think, oh, he said that was awesome. If I say Jesus is lit, that means Jesus is awesome. I have a totally different group of people in here from a different generation that if I use the word lit are going to come to me after church and say, why did you say that? So here's I want y'all to understand my struggle, and I can't find a way to use that word that both fits your meaning but doesn't communicate something different to the older audience. So that is the joy of being in a multi-generational church, and that is the joy of having young and old people, which we love, right? But that's also, you got to be careful which words you use in the context that you use them. So Zach, as much as I would love to honor you, I did it, right? Because I talked about it. But I'm just sitting there and Zach says, you got to use this word. I'm thinking, how in the world am I going to use that word in a way that both age groups get the same message? And I just couldn't figure it out. Mary Magdalene, Joanna, the wife of Cuza, Susanna. 3 women who traveled with Jesus. I just call them the women. I've often wondered about that traveling band. Jesus going from town to town. And it says that these women ministered to him out of their own means. It's the same word that we get the word deacon from, which doesn't mean anything except it means that they served Jesus. They served Jesus by their own means. And it means that the way that it's written, that they just didn't do it one time, but it was kind of a continual habit that often, more times, that they just kept giving and giving and giving to Jesus and his ministry. Have you ever wondered how that little traveling band of 12 disciples plus all the others that followed, how they found a place to stay and a place to eat? How they found clothing and other things? One of the ways is this group of women who traveled with Jesus. In fact, Luke tells us that that's the typical way that Jesus' ministry was supported. Now, I know Jesus can do remarkable things, right? I mean, he fed 5,000. So surely if he can feed 5,000, he can feed this traveling band. I'm sure that Jesus had ways of getting money. Remember when they wanted to pay Peter came to them with a question about the temple tax, and do you remember how Jesus got the money for the temple tax? Hey, Peter, go down and go fishing, catch a fish, open them out, the money for the temple tax, mine and yours will be in there, then take that to the temple. So, I mean, Jesus can get money out of a fish's mouth. Now, if we could do that, a lot more of us would be fishermen, wouldn't we? But So Jesus had a way of supporting. I'm sure when Jesus went into town, there were people who were willing to put him up, right? Like the house of Mary and Martha and Lazarus, who brought him in for a meal, or eating at Simon's house, the thing that we studied last week. So there's this outgoing pouring of hospitality. Remember that the Passover preparation, he said, go into town and tell this person I need to use his house. So Jesus had people he could call on. But Luke says these women who traveled with Jesus supported his needs. They were Jesus' first real financial support. They took care of him. They ministered to him. They used their own means. And I don't know how much it cost for all of that to happen, but there's these three women that's mentioned in this text that does that for Jesus. Now, the interesting thing is, not every rabbi in Jesus' day thought that a woman traveling with a group of disciples would have been a good idea. In fact, most of them would have been pretty much against that. There is this section in the Mishnah, it's the Avot, which is some ethical sayings. And so just listen to a rabbi that's pretty contemporary to Jesus. Jose ben Yohanan of Jerusalem says, let your house be wide open, and seat the poor at your table, and don't talk too much with women. He spoke of a man's wife. All the more so is the rule to be applied to the wife of one's fellow. In this regard, did sages say, so long as a man talks too much with a woman, 1, he brings trouble on himself. 2, waste time better spent on studying Torah. And 3, and ends up a hair of Gehenna. Now, there were some other rabbis, like Rabbi Eleazar said that you should teach your daughter the Torah so that she would understand her rights under the Torah. But most, like Ben Azai just said, they strenuously objected to teaching any woman the law. But here's Jesus, kind of a different kind of rabbi. And in this traveling band, he has women who travel with him who take care of his needs. Women like Mary Magdalene. I'm broken, there we go. Mary Magdalene, mentioned more times in the New Testament than any other woman except for Mary, the mother of Jesus. Every time there is a list of women, except for one, where John lists the women that are at near the cross at Jesus' crucifixion, except for that list in the Gospel of John, every time that there is a list of women who, Mary Magdalene is always at the beginning of the list. Mary Magdalene that Jesus cast 7 demons out of. Mary Magdalene that was a devoted disciple of Jesus. Mary Magdalene is near the cross when Jesus is crucified. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary, but those two followed after Jesus' death and watched where Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus buried the body. She watched Nicodemus bring those 75 pounds of spices for the body of Jesus. Mary Magdalene, who at the first opportunity went to the tomb where they had buried Jesus. And Mary Magdalene, the first person Jesus appeared to after his resurrection, who with some other women went and told the apostles that he had been resurrected. Her devotion is just incredible. The 7 demons, I don't know if that 7 to show that she was completely under Satan's control, but this woman who became a disciple of Jesus and followed him from place to place, helped take care of him from her own money. Joanna, the wife of Cuza. Don't know much about Joanna, the wife of Cuza, do we? She occurs here and one time in Luke when the women are listed again. She's mentioned as being the wife of Cuza because Cuza is a He has some kind of role in Herod's household. I'm not really sure what. I can't really narrow it down to one particular thing. That word could mean that he was a manager or a foreman or a steward. It could mean that he was a guardian of Herod. It could mean he would be a procurator under Roman. I don't know exactly what he was. But he was somebody who was pretty important in Herod's structure. His wife, Joanna, also took care of Jesus' needs. Luke has this incredible insight into what's going on in Herod's household if you read through the Gospel of Luke, and maybe Joanna is one of the reasons for that. Don't know anything about her outside of just those two occurrences in the text. Susanna, mentioned here in Luke chapter 8, verse 3. Never mentioned again in the text. Just this one time. By the way, this is one of the women who followed Jesus and helped take care of his needs out of her. She ministered to him out of her own needs, out of her own, and the idea there is out of their own possessions. Were they all wealthy? I don't know how wealthy they were. They all had money. They all helped Jesus in his travels. You know, when you start looking at that, then you've got a couple of other verses. Just quickly, let's just look at these. Many women were there, and this is at the cross of Jesus. Many women were there. And hang on to that, many women, okay? Many women were there. Watching from a distance. They had followed Jesus from Galilee. Why did they follow him? To take care of his needs. And among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of Zebedee's sons. Some women were watching from a distance. This is Mark, the same occurrence. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James the younger and of Joseph, and Salome. In Galilee, these women had followed him and cared for his needs, and many other women who had come up with him to Jerusalem were also there. And I find that extremely interesting. And when you start putting those lists together, and if you want to come see me in private, I'll tell you how I came up with this, but I think by name there are probably 5 women who are listed. There's Mary Magdalene, Salome, who's the mother of James and John, and also she's referred to as Mary's sister, Mary, the mother of Jesus' sister, which means James and John and Jesus would have been cousins. Susanna, who's only mentioned in one of the texts. Mary, who's also called the other Mary in some places. She's also called the mother of James the Less and Joseph, or she's called the mother of Joseph in a couple of places. In one place, I think it's the same woman who's called the wife of Clopas, and Joanna, the wife of Cuza. And who are those women? Mary, the wife of Clopas, the mother of James the Less and Joseph. James the Less is one of the apostles. And so you kind of think about that. So he follows Jesus, and his mother is helping take care of Jesus' needs. I don't know if it's true. I have nothing to gauge it by. Church tradition says that Clopas was the brother of Joseph, who is the earthly father of Jesus. I don't know if that's right or not. Hegesippus writes that in the late first, early second century. So maybe has early church tradition in its favor. Don't know much about her, honestly. Just those couple of mentions. You have Salome, who is the mother of James and John. Also, I think, is probably the same one who's called the sister of Mary. This is just conjecture, but I've often wondered. So James and John are in the boat with their dad, right? Jesus calls them. They leave their father in the boat and follow Jesus. Peter, by the way, on his own boat. So James and John follow Jesus, and Salome also travels with Jesus some. It kind of brings kind of a little meaning. You remember when James and John and their mom came and said, hey, I want you to grant me a favor, put one son on the left and one son on the right. And Jesus said, is that not mine to grant? But it kind of makes more sense. Sometimes earlier I wondered, would she just show up like one day when Jesus is traveling? But she's probably with them a great deal of the time. And then there's that word in many, many others. Many others. How many? I don't know. What were their names? Don't have any idea. And that's not the part that's important. Jesus knows. Jesus knew them by name. Jesus knew their hearts. Jesus knew what they were about. Jesus knew what they were trying to accomplish. And then there's this verse that kind of seems, just listen to this for a second. While they were wondering about this is after the resurrection. Suddenly 2 men in clothes that gleamed like lightning stood beside them, and them were some women. And in their fright, the women bowed down with their faces to the ground, but the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here. He is risen. Remember how he told you while he was still with you in Galilee, the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men, be crucified, and on the third day be raised again." And then they remembered his words. Don't read that too quick. You know the cool thing about that verse? Remember how he told you. When Jesus is giving his instruction about who he is and the kingdom and the death and the burial and the resurrection, he was giving that instruction to them. They were there listening and learning, which would have been very different than some other rabbis. These women who traveled with Jesus and met his needs. Couple of quick lessons. Time and money are two of the most important things to give Jesus, and these women gave both. Now, I want you to think about that. Time and money are two of the most important things to give Jesus, and these women gave both. And very honestly, time and money is sometimes the thing that we give the less. Time and money. Jesus could count on these women. When there was something that needed to be done, they continually, many times, gave him help. When God has a poor person he wants to bless, can he count on you? When a Christian work has to be strengthened or money or resources has to be poured into something that the church needs to do, can he count on you? Has he found that you are faithful in those things? You know, if we give him our heart, do we give him? I mean, I don't want to, we don't like to talk about money. Do we give him our wallet and our savings account? Do we give him our bank account? If Jesus needed us to take care of his needs while he preached the message, can he count on us? And I want to pat you on the back some because he can count on you. I mean, we just took up a collection not long ago. You know what that collection is for? It's for the work of the church. And you guys are generous. And I didn't ask the elders if I could say this, but I'll say it anyway. I'm thankful for you. And I'm thankful for your generosity and the way that you reach out and the way that you try to help. These women gave time and money. And one of the things that we're, how about time? How about time? Man, we're busy, aren't we? I mean, we're busy. We are a busy generation. I'm not saying all the stuff that we do is good and we need to be busy with it, but I'm just saying we're busy. We have a lot of stuff going on. All of you have places to go, things to do, people to see. You have jobs and families and all of the things in life that you need to take care of, and everybody's pulling on your time, and everybody wants part of your time. But when you start analyzing all of that time and you start prioritizing it, is Jesus somewhere in there? Is he somewhere in there, or do we just say, well, that's kind of church. We get to that later. Well, I know that's kind of important, but it's just, we'll get, where does he fit? Where does he fit on that priority of time? The Gallman's listening. And healed people heal people. Isn't that cool? Do you remember what it said about those women? Do you remember what was read about those women? Been healed. Various diseases. Mary Magdalene, 7 demons. See, when you realize that you have been healed, then you can reach out and start healing other people. Healed people really don't have an image to protect. We already know we're broken. We already know that we're messed up. We already know that we're not perfect. Pride is this huge hindrance to worship and to being able to serve and let God work through your life. And when you really understand that you have been healed, you can forfeit the pride, because all of a sudden you realize who you are. You don't have to hide that from anybody. I'm a healed person. I'm a saved person. I have sin. I have difficulty. I have struggle. I have problems. And that's just the way life works, isn't it? I'm not insulated from that because I'm your preacher. I struggle with life just like you struggle with life. And the individual who's seeking to kind of protect their image, they don't really get in a quarrel about who's the greatest, because it really just doesn't matter anymore. You had women who were healed by Jesus, that the only thing that they wanted to do was to go out and heal others, and they didn't let image get in their way. Mary Magdalene knew who she was. I don't know what was wrong with Joanna or Susanna or some of those others. But people who are healed learn to minister to God with the needs, with whatever they have available to them, because they understand how important Jesus is and what He has done for them. And that's where the generosity comes from. The generosity doesn't come from a law. Generosity can't come from, you need to give X percentage, or give as you've prospered. However you phrase that. You can't gift generosity by law. Generosity to Jesus is valued because you value who Jesus is. And because Jesus has ministered to me, I am going to do what I can to serve in His ministry. And healed people, they just heal people. They know what it is to be hurt, and they know what it is to be disappointed in themselves, and they know what it is not to be perfect, and they know when they don't have the right answers or they haven't behaved in the right way, and they're just open to Jesus using them to heal someone else. And here's the other thing. God's greatest servants usually minister without fanfare. I'm convinced that most of us fit under the many. I'm just convinced that if a gospel writer was going to sit down and talk about us, and it would sound something like, and boy, many people did stuff to serve Jesus. It wouldn't be named by names. We wouldn't even be one of maybe the 5 women who are listed. It's going to be a kind word when somebody needs it. It's you selflessly helping somebody else. It's you putting somebody else's needs above your own. A moment when you buy a meal for a hungry person. Or maybe you get medicine for somebody who's sick. Maybe it's a kind deed for a widow or an orphan. Maybe it's $1 or $2 that you give to somebody who needs it. Maybe it's a prayer for somebody who doesn't know which way to turn. Maybe it's not even a spoken word. It's just a look or an arm around a shoulder or a hug. Just a moment that you are a hurting person and healed person who's helping a hurting person. And then there's God, Jesus, who in all of His power sees every one of those acts that we consider small and meaningless. Man, it'd be really easy to read over Acts chapter 8, especially verses 2 and 3. Oh yeah, by the way, there's these women who traveled around helping Jesus. Right, we just fly right by that looking for a really great story, right? Maybe that is the greatest story. People who just take what they have and serve Jesus. And again, you can't do that by law. You know where it comes from? It comes from a heart who understands that they're broken and they need help. It comes from a heart who understands, I've done things against God and I need forgiveness. It comes from a heart that says, I don't have anywhere to turn because I don't have anything to offer. What do I give God for my sin? And they come to the realization that they have nothing to offer except the Son of God who came in the flesh simply said, if you have faith in me, I'll take care of your sin. Oh, you don't deserve it. You didn't earn it. but I'm there to take care of it if you will just believe who I say that I am. And that person, when they come to realization of that Jesus is the Son of God, you know what I want to do? Man, I want to tell people, I believe Jesus is the Son of God. We fancily call that confession, but it's just, man, I believe Jesus is the Son of God. You know, I want to honor Him with my life. We give it a fancy word and call it repentance, but it's Jesus, if you're going to save me, here I am. Do with me whatever you want to do, and I will start doing things to honor you. Or we make it a fancy word, but it's just a normal response of faith. And baptism. That death and burial and resurrection, that connection to the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Jesus, that newness of life, because I want to be new. I don't want to be the same person that I was. I want to be something different. And that is seen so beautifully in baptism. You die and you're buried and you're raised to a new life. And then after, I just want to go out and glorify God. We call that piety. So we put big fancy words on all of that. But you know what it is? Somebody who says, I believe that Jesus is the Son of God and I want Jesus to save me from my sin. I have nowhere else to turn. Just like some women who followed Jesus. If you need to respond in some way, I'm going to ask you to do that while we stand and sing.